autocrats learn much more from each other than democrats do. And this autocratic international of the populist forces, I think it works pretty well.
Dear friends, welcome to another edition of the Forum 2000 online chats. My name is Sascha Hannig, and I'll be moderating this conversation. Europe and Hungary, Hungarian Prime Minister Orbán and his ruling party Fidesz have developed a form of illiberal democracy that has led Hungary to become the only EU country to be listed as partially free. Orbán's party won a fourth consecutive term in office in April's parliamentary election, once again talking a two-thirds majority in the parliament. What does this mean for Europe in times of democratic decline, resurgent authoritarianism, authoritarian influence, and war? To answer all these questions today, we have a very special expert, Dr. Krekó. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Sas, for having me.
I have a series of, I'm sure there are very general questions, but I know people who are listening to this conversation may not know. So I want to start with the basic phenomenon. What is a liberal democracy? And you also talk about informational autocracy. So what is informational autocracy and how it relates with Hungary?
Yes, I think it's an important question, and it fits to a broader trend that we can observe in all over the world. The concept of informational autocracy or spin dictatorship is coming from Guriyev and Treisman, who labeled the new kinds of autocracies this way. New kinds of autocracies does not use direct violence to oppress their citizens because they don't have to. There are no mass imprisonments, there are no not necessary beating up of protesters, no killed journalists, no killed political opponents, no banned political parties, but at the same time manipulation of information. What we can observe in Hungary is that the most centralized media system within the whole European Union was set up, and it operates as a highly efficient brainwashing machinery that practically can bring citizens to a different reality by distorting basic news and just give you one information. I think just give you one illustration. In most of the countries that were hit hard by the COVID, the leading parties suffered, or the president suffered as a consequence. Exactly. Let's think about Donald Trump or Jair Bolsonaro. The popularity of Viktor Orbán remained untouched, despite the fact that Hungary had the second highest mortality rate in ratio to the population due to COVID within the whole European Union. So very high mortality rate, two-thirds of the Hungarian population was not aware of the fact. The other thing is that more than two-thirds of the Fidesz voters, the governmental voters in Hungary, think that this is Ukraine to blame for the invasion of Russia. So if you can manipulate the information well, and this is the art of informational autocracies, then you don't have to oppress your citizens, and you can play a democrat. And there are more and more autocrats like that. They are look-alike democrats who wear suits and not military uniforms, but at the same time can quite aggressively and violently distort reality.
I want to touch upon a lot of things that you mentioned. And you mentioned the voters, the support that this party has. I read an article you wrote about this phenomenon, and you said that actually it is the lower income groups that are the greatest supporters of Orbán and his party. But not only that, but they also the most apolitical ones. So they either support Orbán or they don't support anyone. How should we interpret this? How these two factors correlate, being apolitical or being less engaged with politics and supporting these kind of leaders?
Yeah, it's very important because it's highly counterintuitive. You would assume that the winners of the regime are the most enthusiastic supporters, but the reality is just the other way around. The losers of the regime, who have sometimes no jobs, no social benefits, no flats, nothing, they are the most enthusiastic supporters of Orbán's regime because it can give them some kind of symbolic reward, national pride, feeling somehow brave and proud Hungarians, to also entertainment through the clashes with the European Union and with the big globalist forces. So I think it pretty much proves that politics today is much more about the circus than about the bread, because the ones who have the bread, they are more reluctant to vote for Orbán. The upper middle classes who had a lot of social benefits, who had a lot of tax reductions, who had a lot of state support, are much less happy about the Orbán regime than the losers, because they have more information, they have higher education, and they have better quality of information, so they can see much more the negativities and the, for example, corrupt nature of the regime, unlike the ones who are oppressed and have much worse information and less information, and also less interested about politics as well.
That's very interesting because you mentioned the circus and you also mentioned Bolsonaro or Trump, and these are they're related to populism, which is similar or is related to this form of illiberalism, but it's not exactly the same. Nevertheless, we do see people like Orbán gaining popularity abroad, and I think one of the examples we think about a very popular leader in Latin America is Bukele, isn't he? And he runs a very similar kind of style of government. So my question is, how does this trend, this kind of leader, this kind of politics spread across borders? Do you think people see what Orbán is doing and they say, oh, this is the kind of president I want for my country? Or is it a response to something that is happening across democracies in general?
I think one of the problems of our days is that autocrats learn much more from each other than democrats do. And this autocratic international of the populist forces, I think it works pretty well. Viktor Orbán is welcome not only in Brazil, but in the United States as well, especially in the conservative right, not in the on the governmental circles. Orbán has very good relationship with the European far-right forces, not with the mainstream anymore. And I think he is increasingly a model for illiberals all over the world because he shows the way to success. Orbán also sends his political consultants to elections in the Western Balkans and also at other parts of the world. He promised help for Jair Bolsonaro for his re-election because he is seen like a success politician, even in the United States. But of course, he's not the only one. I think Donald Trump is also a great inspiration still for many all around the world, but he failed at the last presidential election. Orbán could win 4 consecutive terms, but what is very important to see here is that yes, he won. Yes, he won because he's popular, not because he cheated at the election, but the elections were highly unfair. So if you do not have access to the basic information and you live in an Orwellian world with a totally distorted information environment, citizens simply cannot make informed decisions. And if they cannot make informed decisions, we cannot talk about a democracy.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned other leaders that are gaining popularity in Europe, and we know their names, we know Bolsonaro. Considering what is happening now in Ukraine and how the West more or less has responded to the crisis and has shown that, okay, we can apply sanctions, we can give a tougher response, we can be the tough leader in power, even though we are democratic. Do you think this has changed the prospects for other illiberal or populist leaders in Europe?
Yes, it did. I think there are 2 stages of this the reaction of the European politics to the war. And the first stage was about sympathy, was about condemning Russia, was about moral outrage due to the genocide and of killing civilians and so on. But I think we are entering in the second stage where interest about Ukraine is on the decline. There is a Ukraine fatigue. Energy prices are soaring up. Inflation of food products are just rising to the sky, and it's partially because of the war, partially independent of the war. But still, I think it gives more and more room for politicians such as Viktor Orbán, such as, for example, Matteo Salvini, Giorgia Meloni, such as Marine Le Pen, who say that let's stop the sanctions, let's stop to support Ukraine, let's defend your own people, let's provide welfare for your own people. And when you did that, then you can go into foreign policy exercises. And I think this kind of soft pro-Russian relativist messaging is just getting a stronger audience. And the winter is coming with very high energy prices. So I do think that democracies in Europe are shock-proof, but there will be very serious shocks during the winter. What we can tell, on the other hand, is that there was the economic crisis in 2008-2009, there was the migration crisis in 2015-16, and if Europe survived those, I'm pretty sure that Europe will survive these higher energy prices as well. But it will be difficult anyway, and it will give some more room to the European far right to rise.
Mm-hmm. So the next 4 to 5 months will be critical, and we will see how leaders in the West respond. Thank you so much for explaining us the situation. I am sure everyone who's listening to this conversation knows much more about Hungary and Orbán than they did after they clicked play. And we hope to meet again in the future. Thank you.